This is Project Management Paradise.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Project Management Paradise podcast, your passport to project success. I'm your host, Aaron Murphy, and today I'm delighted to be joined on the podcast by Richard Carson. For anyone who doesn't know Richard, he is a consultant, author, and researcher in organizational change management, OCM for short. As CEO and president of Carson and Associates, he advises public and private organizations on change management, strategic planning, and performance improvement. Richard, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. How are you today?
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much for joining us. And for anyone who might not know you, maybe you can tell us about yourself and your background, and how did you end up becoming an expert in change management?
Well, I have had 30 years as a manager in the private and the public sector, then another 10 years as a consultant, and finally I did my doctorate studies. My kind of career philosophy has been carpe diem, or seize the day. I have gone from opportunities rather than having kind of a planned career path. So I started out in archaeology, went on to architecture, urban planning, and finally change management. I hired a company in my last job. I hired a company to help me with making the organization more performance efficient and cost effective. And at the end of the process, I went to work for them. They were a change management company, and that's what I did for the next 10 years.
Not your traditional career route.
No, it wasn't.
Over your time working in change management, I'd imagine you have your own definition or what change management means to you. Maybe you could tell us what change management means to you, because everyone has a different perspective or a different take on what it means to them.
Well, change management to me is the process, tools, and the techniques that are used to manage the people side of change to achieve a required outcome. I focus on people and not, say, finance, because organizations are people-driven. And the model that I use is people-sustained organizational change management. It's all about people.
And I suppose without the people, you can't really have much change.
Exactly. People are the problem and people are the solution.
That's very, very true. And as I mentioned in the introduction, you are an author and you've recently wrote the book of Change. What has inspired you to write the book? And did you see it as a gap in the market, or was it a way to share your knowledge?
Well, first of all, I wanted to mention the title, the Book of Change. I used the title from the I Ching, which is the Book of Changes. It was a Chinese book of divination, which is appropriate. My wife and daughters are both Chinese, and I've spent time in both Hong Kong and mainland China. So the Book of Change was a natural title. The book itself was a result of my studies at Washington State University in organizational psychology. And I basically wrote the book both based on my consulting experience and my research. And I wrote the book because I come from a family of writers, so I'm a bit compulsive about writing all the time. I've written over 100 articles on a variety of topics, nationally, internationally, so I can't help myself.
Well, that's really interesting, and it's a nice little tie-in with the name, the origin of it, which is really nice.
Yeah.
And from doing your research over the years and all of your studies as well, what were the three most important things you discovered from your research?
Well, it was both the research and my experience, that the solutions to creating and maintaining successful change comes from the line staff. You have to include them. It isn't a top-down process. It may start that way, but to be successful, it has to be a bottom-up process. The change management models that I looked at over 100 change management models, focused on 22 that were created since the field was created by Kurt Lewin in 1947. And what I found was most of them follow the same generalized format, which is like 3 to 5 steps, but the level of actionable detail wasn't there. And that's what, from my experience as a consultant, that's what I wanted to provide. So it is 3 phases, 10 steps, 39 actionable steps that you can follow in total or in part. A lot of times I found that what you are told by management, what the problem is not the problem. It's sometimes they may either have a personal agenda or just not understand the issues that are facing them. So it's really a problem, so that can be a problem. And the solution is really, like I said, to work with line staff kind of from the bottom up to understand the underlying causes of problems.
That's really interesting. I'd imagine because the managers are looking at it from such a high level, they're not actually down in the weeds, so to speak, actually with the day-to-day process of actually doing the tasks or any of the usual jobs. They're just seeing like a higher level view. Would that be correct?
Yes. I'll give you an example. I did a performance review of an organization, and basically the board, the officials were saying, well, the public, has a really bad view of how these people are performing. They just saying, they aren't performing at all. And so after doing a lot of interviews, going through the process about what the problem was the manager of the group I was focused on was micromanaging to the point where he was requiring his staff to record every task they did in 15-minute increments. They were spending more time documenting what they did than doing it. And the people at the top of the organization didn't realize that. And it solving that problem alone made the staff a lot happier. It made their performance a lot better. So, that's an example of what they didn't know.
That's really interesting. I suppose no one likes a micromanager and they just hinder the progress of a team. So,
well, especially when you're sitting at your desk writing down every 15 minutes what you just did.
Yeah, that just sounds horrific. Thankfully, haven't experienced that myself, and I hope to never experience that myself.
Well, neither I. That was very unusual.
And from your experience, what is the biggest obstacles to successful organizational change?
Well, a couple of things. The first one is resistance. People have a natural resistance to change. They can have a knee-jerk reaction. What I hear all the time is, but we've always done it this way. That's their mantra. So it's imperative to get buy-in from the line staff, not just the leadership. The other obstacle can be leadership. Basically, they can be paying lip service to it because they're required to by an appointed, elected board of some kind. So if you can't get the buy-in from leadership from the get-go, it's going to fail.
Interesting. And would they go hand in hand in essence? So if there is resistance from, just say, the everyday people in the company, and then maybe resistance from leadership, would that be something that's occurred before in organizations that's hindered this progress or the success of the change management?
Well, what I found in terms of success is, first, making sure that the leadership is on board and really is serious about this. But second is to spend a lot of time with the line staff and basically say, look, we are going to include you in making changes. And what I've actually done is set up working groups around particular problems of line staff, from customer service on the front line to operational staff, mid-level staff. And if they come up with the solutions, they'll buy into the process. But if you go to them and say, look, here's the deal, you're going to do this whether you like it or not, you're on the bus or off the bus, well then you're doomed right there. So I try to create a working environment with everybody in the organization having a role to find solutions.
It's getting the buy-in, really, making sure that everyone's happy and that it's not been forced upon them.
Yeah, from the very beginning, when I sit down with staff, I basically tell them, look, your life, your work life will be better if you participate in this process. Things will improve, not just performance, but in general. But you really need to buy into it, because if you don't, things will only get worse. And so far, I've been able to get people in work groups who come up with great solutions and who embrace the process instead of resist the process.
Absolutely. And you probably get some really good ideas as well from those people.
Oh yeah, because they know what's going on. The leadership may want to set particular goals and understand the general kind of reason for the organization, the reason, etc. But they don't understand at the front line level what is really going on. A lot of times it could be a faulty process, or it could be an individual. In the case of the micromanager, you don't really know until you get into it.
From your experience, what's the key to good performance when it comes to change management?
You have to set achievable goals and back that up with adequate resources and require accountability. One of the things that's very important is to create a workable strategic plan that actually gets implemented. But you have to have those three elements in order for it to actually occur.
Interesting. And I suppose when you don't follow the plan, then you're going to see where, just say you left one of those three off, you'll see there will be a dip, and it'll just be going in the negative, so to speak.
Yep. It's, a lot of times a strategic plan will become a shelf document to make somebody happy. Well, we did it. Here it is. Put it on the shelf. And then they ignore it. So like I said, you got to set achievable goals, but you got to give them real adequate resources, and you have to find a way to make sure that people do what is said in terms of accountability.
Interesting. And can you give examples of what has worked and what hasn't worked when it comes to organizational change?
Well, I can tell you that what doesn't work is dictating change from the top. In other words, top management says, you shall do this. We're going to change and you shall do this. And the first thing that happens is that you get no buy-in from the line staff or even middle management, who actually resist the change and can even sabotage it. And then, like I said, it doesn't work to create a strategic plan that's basically just a shelf document. What does work is to create that strategic planning document, and what I found most successful is to assign a person as the change manager. And I've actually done this in my own organization. Somebody is designated the change manager. That person walks around the organization on a daily basis and says, how are you doing with your goal? Do you have the resources you need? And makes them accountable. If they just basically blow them off, then there's a problem. But having a person, the CEO can't be the change manager. CEO has enough problems dealing with the public, dealing with their board, dealing with external and internal or existential issues. But you need a person that's their sole job is implementing change. And I found that is the most successful thing you can do.
And I'd imagine from doing the organizational change from leadership down, you probably lose a good lot of staff, because people, they're resistant to this and they don't like this quick change in direction that the company's going, and been forced to comply with this without, been informed of the decision to do this, or even having their input taken in?
Yeah. I mean, people, you will either, if you try to force change, you will either lose people who just say, look, take this job and, whatever, and won't do it. I actually have this is a micro example, but I had an organization in my, personal assistant at the time. I said, well, I told you I wanted the organization to move from WordPerfect to Microsoft Word. And her reaction was, well, if you make me do this, I'll quit. And my reaction was, oh, well, I'm sorry to see you go. But people will either leave or, they'll sabotage the process. They will find ways to screw it up. And, you need people to be part of the process and really embrace it.
Absolutely. And I'd imagine the key skill for those people will be communication, how to take the information from a higher level and be able to explain the benefits, so to speak, to the general staff on why we're going this direction, and to take the information from them and bring it back to leadership.
Exactly.
Amazing. And Richard, we have a reoccurring question that we ask on the podcast, and I'm looking forward to hearing your answer. But what's the most important piece of advice you've received, and how has it helped you in your career?
I actually got this maybe the hard way from my wife, which at one point said, I don't want your advice. I want you to listen to me. And that is really important for managers. Managers tend to be in charge, right? Telling people what to do, managing the processes, but it's really important to listen to what people are saying to you and have empathy for what people are telling you. That's how you come to understand the organization and the problems. And managers aren't necessarily good listeners. Like I said, they come across as not really listening. And I guess that is the most important advice I have for any manager or for the change process. We spend a lot of time interviewing people not from the front counter, middle management, but externally to stakeholders, vendors, everybody that interacts or participates in the organization in terms of people, we interview and we take copious notes. There's usually two of us, one to listen, one to write. And, that's really where the change becomes successful, because people really understand that you are serious. You're not just blowing smoke. A lot of it isn't like, I'm not going to be critical of other consultants, but, you can't come in with a program and just do the program. You got to every organization is unique and has a set of people issues that are unique, and you need to pay attention to that and let people know that you care about what they're saying.
Absolutely. And listening is one of those underrated skills. A lot of people are listening, but they're waiting to speak. They're not actually taking that information in.
And people can tell. And you can tell by your demeanor that you're just waiting to tell them something and you're not paying attention at all. And that's not productive in terms of getting at the real issues. Organizations consist of people, individuals, groups, and you really need to understand the culture, the psychology of that culture, and first and foremost. And you learn that not from a strategic plan or some document. You learn that from talking to people and listening to what they're saying.
No, absolutely. And if that culture is already set within an organization and you're coming in and you're trying to change it, it's best to listen to what they're doing rather than trying to impose something that they do not want.
Well, and that's where the we've always done it this way mantra comes in, because if you go into an organization and you've got people there that have been there 10, 20, 30 years, and they're being told they need to change, their first reaction is, why? Everything's perfect. There's no problems.
Yeah, they're set in their ways, so to speak.
Well, that's why it's very, very important to get their buy-in and basically make them a real part of the process. And then, in reality, their recommendations, what they're telling you, are substantive. They aren't just telling you something to make you happy. I mean, they have complaints, real and imaginary, but they also understand the process a lot better than the CEO thinks he or she does.
They have that key insights that could be quite informative on decision making in the future.
Yep, and you learn a lot. I mean, like I said, what the leadership tells you. If a board of directors or a city council or whatever wants this kind of a performance review, the CEO or the manager, the top person, their antenna goes up and they feel like they're the target. And that's, getting, like I said, it's tough, but getting leadership buy-in from the very beginning so people believe that they've bought into it, that they're serious about it, is just as important as line staff getting, buying into the process. It's all about people.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Richard, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I've really enjoyed it. There's some great nuggets of information in there for our listeners to take back. But the final question I do have for you today is, if anyone was interested in getting in touch with yourself, learning more about yourself, and continuing this conversation, or maybe they want to pick up a copy of the Book of Change, which is the best place to reach you and best places to get a copy of your book?
It's real simple. You go to bookofchange.com. And if folks are interested, I will provide them a free PDF of the book. But all the contact information, there's a video overview of the process in the book. So it's bookofchange.com. That's all you need to remember, and you can contact me through there.
Fantastic. I'll make sure to include that in our show notes. If you are enjoying this episode of the podcast and you are listening on any of the audio platforms, we would greatly appreciate if you could leave a 5-star review. And if you're watching the video on YouTube, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. And finally, Richard, thank you so much for being on the podcast today.
Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening to the Project Management Paradise podcast at projectmanagementparadise.com. We'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to leave a review via our podcast app, or you can email your comments or guest suggestions to hello@projectmanagementparadise.com. Finally, if you have not already done so, don't forget to subscribe.